Hey guys, today I'm down in Southern California finally getting hands-on with the all-new Volvo EX90. This is arguably the most important product that Volvo has launched in decades and decades because this is their all-new three-row flagship SUV. And it's designed to compete not just with the Tesla Model X, but also something like the Mercedes-Benz EQS, obviously the Rivian R1S, and a whole host of upcoming three-row luxury SUVs. So let's find out if this is the ultimate electric family hauler or if you should check out something else. Versus most of the competition for the EX90, there are some solid differences. The first one, of course, is the positioning in the lineup. The EX90 isn't just Volvo's electric three-row SUV, it's also the Volvo flagship. So on the inside, we find more luxury touches, more tech, and more safety tech, like this built-in LIDAR sensor, than we find in the rest of the Volvo lineup. And versus something like, I don't know, a Cadillac Vistiq that's coming up soon, that's obviously not going to be the flagship of the Cadillac brand, so we don't know exactly where that will land pricing-wise. The other thing you'll notice is it looks an awful lot like the rest of the Volvo lineup, with a relatively long hood profile, a definitely boxy proportion, and of course the classic Volvo design language up front. There are some nods to the modernity and to the tech-focused interior in that we have full LED headlights and these kind of cool LED daytime running light shutters here. It's difficult to show you on camera while I'm standing here because you have to put your foot on the brake pedal and start the car, but when the headlights come on, these split Thor's hammer lights actually open up, revealing the full LED headlights inside, and then the turn signals, they're a little bit lower down on the bumper. Like we find in the C40 and the XC40 Recharge, we have a blanked off grille there because a lot less cooling is required, but I think that the Volvo design language is actually translated really well to the proportions that we find in the EX90, and some of those proportions are definitely different than the competition. Check out this long hood. This is one of the defining characteristics that has intrigued me about the EX90 ever since Volvo announced it. We do have a small front trunk under there, but logically a lot of this is simply reserved for the crash structure that Volvo has been known for. Volvo is saying not just that this is their new flagship, they're saying this is the safest Volvo ever built. And that's definitely believable given Volvo's track record and their safety record, of course. Down here we have 265/40 R22-inch tires on 22-inch wheels. These are really big wheels, and the EX90 overall is 198.3 inches long. It's about 3 inches longer than the XC90, but it's important to know that those 3 inches don't go to more interior volume. A lot of it actually has to do with the front and rear overhangs, especially the more aerodynamic rear end that we find in the EX90 versus the XC90. This is about 1 inch lower in terms of roofline versus the XC90, but it is still incredibly square. Be sure and sound off and let me know what you think of the wheel design down there in the comment section. I'm not the biggest fan of the white accents on this model, but I have to say I'm more torn about this really long hood proportion. This is a really long hood, and it's part of why the EX90 looks so good to my eye. But the downside, again, is practicality. We don't have an enormous cargo compartment under the hood, and it does mean that the passengers are actually quite far away from that. So as far as packaging efficiency goes, you are going to find some more efficiently packaged vehicles out there. We don't have any crash tests just yet, but if I were a betting man, I would bet on the Volvo beating most of them in the real world. As you'd expect out of a safety-obsessed brand like Volvo, their dedication to safety is not just about crash structure design, it's about active systems on the vehicle as well. And the newest, of course, is going to be powered by this LIDAR sensor, kind of beluga whale bump style, right there between the glass roof and the forward-facing camera. Volvo has been a little bit cagey on exactly what the LIDAR sensor is going to be used for in the EX90. It will be used for future levels of autonomy and expanded active safety, but they haven't really expanded on that expanded active safety just yet. LIDAR is here because it's going to be better at identifying objects on the road, day or night. Camera systems are really good in good daylight, but they definitely suffer performance-wise at night. And radar systems cannot always tell what that object is up front. Is that a sofa in the road? Is it another car? Is it an animal, etc.? So using the combined systems of radar, ultrasonic sensors, lots of cameras all the way around, and now a forward-facing LIDAR, Volvo is trying to cover all their bases. I don't know about you, but when it comes to the boxy proportion of the EX90, the Rivian R1S certainly comes to mind, and I think it's going to be one of the toughest competitors for this Volvo. The R1S is a little bit longer. It's also quite a bit higher in terms of its roof height. Now, most of that has to do with the ground clearance. We have a lot less ground clearance in the EX90, even though this does have an adaptive air suspension in this model. Versus the XC90, you'll notice that the roofline is about an inch lower and it tapers more towards the rear. That all has to do with the aerodynamic reality of being a big 3-row EV. At least for the moment, every EX90 sold in North America is going to get a 111 kilowatt-hour battery pack. We don't know if there will be bigger or smaller batteries available in the future, and depending on where you're watching this video around the world, your battery pack may differ slightly. At the moment also, we have the choice of two different power levels. Both of them are dual motor setups, 402 horsepower or 510 horsepower. Now, in kind of a weird twist, the 402 horsepower model has the more powerful motor up front, whereas the 510 horsepower model has the more powerful motor in the back. Since both models have the same battery pack on board, it will take the exact same time to charge either version, about 30 minutes to go 10% to 80%, although we have not been able to verify that DC fast charge speed in the EX90. If we do see a gradual expansion of the supercharger network from Tesla, Volvo has signed on to the supercharger network for access. I suspect this is going to integrate a little bit better than some of the upcoming 3-row 800-volt EVs out there, because this is a nominal 400-volt system, so it's going to be a little bit more compatible with the lower voltage, higher current chargers that we see available from Tesla. Charging happens behind door number 1 on the driver's side rear of the vehicle. Of course, we have a CCS charge connector here, even though Volvo has committed to the future J3400 charging standard. And that's because no manufacturer seems to have those plugs ready, at least for the moment. We don't know when Volvo will have access to the Tesla supercharger network, but because this charge door is on the driver's side rear of the vehicle, maybe a little bit easier to pull into those Tesla supercharger locations versus some of the other charge door orientations out there. Now let's start looking around the interior, starting out with the driver and front passenger seats, of course. Since we're driving the performance model in the top-end trim, we have everything in here. We have multi-way power adjustable driver and front passenger seats with Volvo's available massage function as well. But we have different controls than we've seen from Volvo for a while. Everything is done by this same sort of square knob on the seat. And I have to say, it comes across as a little bit less intuitive than I would like. Something I noted in my recent drive of the Polestar 3, because it uses the exact same seat control as well. This is the first time I can think of that Volvo has ever used a powered tilt telescopic steering column, but there are a few things to know, and some of those are reasons that maybe Volvo didn't do this in the past. The most important one is that the steering wheel does not actually move as far in and out as it does in the XC90, which has a manual column. But interestingly, of course, because the instrument cluster is connected to the steering wheel, that moves with the wheel, giving you a better view of that instrument cluster. So here's that seat control I talked about earlier. At the moment, this moves the seat forward and backward. Rotating it around moves the seat back, recline forward and backward, and then you can move the seat bottom cushion up and down. But if you want to move it in other ways, you press this button in the middle, then this becomes seat bottom cushion tilt, and then this becomes the lumbar support, and the up and down becomes the lumbar support, etc. The thigh cushion extension, that is now manual. Hopping in the back seat, I have tons of room. This front seat's adjusted for me at 6 feet tall. I have maybe about 4.5 inches or so. In my quick test, where you can measure 11 inches up the seat back and then from the seat back to the seat front, I suspect a rear-facing child seat, even some of the larger, bulkier seats, would just barely squeak in here. It does seem like there is a little bit more room in some of the large 2-row EVs out there, but remember, of course, Volvo is packaging that 3rd row into the back. Now, if you have young ones in your family, you're going to love the fact that we have outboard latch anchors in these outboard seats, and depending on the seat design that you have, you may or may not be able to keep them in place while you tilt and slide this seat to the rear. I think it is a little bit tricky because even though the seat bottom cushion flips up and forward, you'll notice that the seat does collapse ever so slightly. So depending on the design of your child seat, that could be a problem. As we've seen in other Volvo models though, we get the integrated child bolster seat right here in the center. That's definitely a cool touch. Quad zone climate control, so 2 separate zones for the rear, and all 3 of these seats slide forward and backward independently. That's really important for this integrated booster seat, because if you want your kid to be a little bit closer to you up front, you want them to feel like they're a bit more of the party, you can scoot that seat forward, and we have a shoulder belt that comes out of the seat itself. And that means that whether a child is here or an adult is here, or you have a child seat anchored into place with the shoulder belt, it's going to be significantly more centered in the seat than it would if it came out of the ceiling. And then of course you don't have that weird bump going on in the ceiling as well. You can of course fold this independently of the other seats as well. And that's another nice touch because a lot of EVs in this segment with bench seats in the middle, you actually have to fold this with the outboard seat, but not in this case. So if you simply wanted to fold an outboard seat down, for instance, right like that for some long item in the back, you can do that. And if you wanted to fold the middle seat without it, you can of course do that as well. As I squeeze myself back here into the third row, remember that the EX90 is intended to be basically an electric XC90, the next generation of that thought process. It was not designed to be some bigger, boxier electric minivan. And that's why rear seat dimensions back here in the third row basically the same as the XC90. So if you have an XC90 and it's too small for you, this is not going to solve that equation. But if you have an XC90 now and you think it's just fine, you're going to be just fine with the EX90. Headroom in the back, that could be a bit better. As you can see, we definitely have more rear seat headroom in something like the R1S, and we have more rear seat legroom, although it's not as much more as you might think. It's only about an inch more legroom in that Rivian. The difference that you will notice in the Rivian, however, is the shape of the floorboards back here. So you can see we have the rear seat, then we have this ledge here, then we have the footwell for the third row. I actually took my shoe off so I didn't get anything dirty back here, but you can see you can kind of tuck your feet under the seats in front of you, but there's really not a lot of room. Now, the second row seats obviously slide forward and backwards, so you can certainly apportion this space more equitably, and I was able to get relatively comfortable back here with the first row adjusted for me, the second row adjusted for me, and that expanded out to maybe about an inch and a half of actual knee room back here in the third row. Back on the topic of child seats, in the third row we have latch anchors for both outboard seating positions. That's quite unusual. This has 4 sets of latch anchors for the outboard second row and the third row as well. Now some of you might be wondering, what happens if those third row seats are folded and you go in to get into the back? Well, we actually have buttons on either side to allow you to power fold or power unfold those third row seats right here from the rear doors. Behind the power hatch, we find pretty similar cargo capacity to the XC90. So if you're happy with your existing Volvo, you're going to be happy with this 3-row EV version. Back here, we have 2 22-inch roller bags. You can lay them down in this position and still close the hatch. That's definitely a practical touch. Although, you would not be able to put these roller bags in that position and still close the hatch. You'd have to rotate them around like that, and at that point you could stick maybe 3 of them across the back. I suspect that most folks are going to keep the third row folded most of the time. We now have a power folding third row mechanism. It is on the speedy side, which is a nice touch, but I think I would personally prefer a manual folding mechanism. That's just my personal preference. Let's go ahead and check out how quickly they come back up. This is, of course, full speed on the camera, so we're not speeding anything up. That's actually not bad, and then you just manually fold those headrests back up. Although we don't have a spare tire in here, we actually have quite a lot of storage space under the load floor. I'll let Travis hold that up while I go digging down here deeper into the cargo area. We have a foam divider, which is removable, and then this somewhat unusually or eccentrically shaped area down here. This is the emergency release for the charge door. Let's go ahead and see if we can squeeze a roller bag in here. And looks like we might actually be able to do this. So 22-inch roller bag, wow, that's basically under the load floor. If you're not pressing down on it, it just does pop up a little bit, but that's actually pretty handy. That means you could stick 1 extra bag back here. And that of course means that if I bought an XC90, the absolute first thing I would do would be to throw this little foam divider away. Moving up front, let's check out the frunk or frubby, whatever you want to call it here, because it is not the biggest front trunk I have ever seen, but there is no separate lid, which is a nice touch. So you just pop open the hood and you have access to this storage well here. This is the Canna-Fix-A-Flat and Tire Inflator Kit. Then there's some plastic dividers to make sure that your stuff doesn't roll around too much. This would definitely be handy for charge cables, adapters, that sort of thing. Now let's look at the rest of the interior. If you've been inside a Volvo model recently, a lot of this is going to look familiar, but there are some important changes, and this certainly looks more modern and more tech-laden than any Volvo in the past. We of course have that instrument cluster that moves with the steering wheel, I mentioned that earlier, and the big LCD in the middle of everything. But Volvo has not gone all in on digital controls for everything. So we still have regular air vents. You move those with your finger right there on that knob. We'll take a look at that in just a second. And we have some actual buttons up here in this area as well. Actual physical buttons for things like the map lights, the dome lights, the telematic system, and hazard lights. Those are all traditional buttons there. We have sun visors that flip down and slide to the side. Nice touch there. But, of course, we have a big glass roof without a shade. I would love to see the option of a steel roof. Maybe that will come in the future, or an electric shade or some sort of electrochromatic dimming to this glass, because it is kind of bright in the sun. There's Travis back there in the rear. You can see what kind of headroom he has back there. Yell out, Travis, what do you think? Are you baking in the sun back there?
I am baking in the sun back here, for
Yep.
sure.
Definitely a very Tesla-like experience for that. But interesting twist, we have hydro-adjustable shoulder belts, not just for the front passengers, but also back there in the second row where Travis is as well. Of course, we have fixed height head restraints, something we've seen from Volvo for quite some time there, perforated because there are speakers integrated into those, and this interior now features the 25-speaker Bowers & Wilkins audio system. This model has the vegan leather upholstery in a two-tone design. I think it's quite attractive. It's made from recycled polymers and corn oil blended together to create what really does look and feel like Napa leather on the inside. Of course, my personal preference would be the wool blend upholstery. That is a blend of eco-sourced wool and recycled polyester fibers, that it adds extra durability. I think that's the direction that I would go in. We have relatively thick bolstering on the sides, relatively wide seat design, so I don't think drivers that are a little bit larger will have any problem there. But I do think that the seat bottom cushion is not quite as cushy as the one in the current XC90. This extending thigh cushion, as I mentioned earlier, is a manual design, not a powered design like we found in the XC. Moving up here, we find door panels made from lots of soft touch materials, just as you'd expect in a vehicle with this kind of price tag. The only hard plastics you'll find are going to be down here around the bottle holder and the speaker grill. That helps improve durability, especially when shoes are scuffing that area. Lots of stitched materials in the midsection of the door, and it's difficult to tell exactly what's going on here, but this is open pore wood running right there across the doors. It's very, very light in color, so in this particular sunlight and on the camera it may look like it's just white plastic, but this is actually open pore wood running right across the dash. We then have a fabric insert right above that, and then more of that stitched imitation leather on top of the dashboard. Again, these air vents operate in a very traditional fashion. They just move up and down side to side like that. Then we have, of course, the big infotainment system right here in the middle of everything. That was the 360-degree camera display. Of course, we have the Google native mapping set up there. Lots of different streaming apps like Tidal, Spotify, etc. If you want to use the Dolby Atmos system to its utmost, you want to make sure you have lossless audio for the vehicle, and Tidal is one of the streaming apps that is going to support that functionality right there. This is a revised version of the Google operating system that we've seen in Volvos for a while, and part of that is due to the extra screen real estate that gives them the ability to have more things docked at the bottom. So these buttons remain pretty consistent across operational modes. We have a button for our apps there, a home screen, which now features a dedicated section on the bottom for recently used functions. These are sort of contextual apps here. They're going to update based on what you've done recently. These are going to update based on what you're doing out there driving. So since we're parked, this is a camera and parking assistant button, but if we were driving, that would turn into the performance mode option. We then have the glove box over there, and then max defrost. You'll notice that we don't have physical controls for the climate control system. Those are all done via the touchscreen. Of course, we have an auto climate control mode, which we can engage right there, and then you can choose whether you want a little bit more air, so low, medium, high right there. But again, no on-screen controls for the air vents or anything along those lines. We do have on-screen controls, however, for the heated seats. You can see right here, I can actually control the rear heated seats as well. Of course, there are also quick access buttons down here at the bottom of the screen for the driver, for the heated steering wheel, heated seats, etc. up there, and you can sync those climate control zones. Over on this vehicle option, we have access to quick controls for the lights, driver adjustment, etc. The display and the software is definitely snappier than what we find in the XC90. However, I have to say that following Tesla down the rabbit hole for controlling things like the steering wheel and side mirrors via a combination of this touchscreen and buttons on the steering wheel was the wrong direction, I think. I would have loved to have seen some dedicated mirror and steering wheel controls just inside. Now down here, important buttons to know, we have one pedal driving, and you can have it on, you can have it off, or you can have it in auto. In the auto mode, it is going to use the radar sensor in the vehicle to actually adapt the one pedal driving to your particular driving situation. So that is kind of a cool touch there. I did notice that we don't have all of the various software modules in this system just yet. So So for instance, we're going to get Apple CarPlay and Android Auto projection, and probably some additional efficiency screens coming at some later date. The Bowers & Wilkins audio systems that Volvo has been using in a lot of their models lately have definitely received a lot of acclaim for good reason. I really like the way that it sounds. I also think that the center channel speaker looks pretty cool up there at the top of the dash. We have lots of stitched materials on the upper section of the dashboard, and I really appreciate the amount of wood trim that we find in here. It gives us a warmer and more inviting feel than we find in, for instance, the related Polestar 3. Below that touchscreen infotainment system, we find a Qi wireless charging mat. It's definitely on the larger side, and I appreciate that it's not tucked away somewhere. So not only is it easier to get your phone in and out and remember that your phone is there, it also seems to charge smartphones with those thicker cases pretty well. Over here we have the power and volume knob. It's a bit difficult to see the detail inside that, but it kind of looks like little fish scales inside under that clear plastic cover. This also functions as track forward backward. It toggles side to side, as you can see there. Lots more wood trim going on here in the center console. Again, it's a little bit difficult to see on camera. I'm sure it looks a little blue on the screen. It actually has a really nice warm light feel to it. Very modern Scandinavian in feel. Two really big cup holders happen under that sliding door. I wasn't able to measure the ones in the XC90, but these appear to be a little bit further apart, so I suspect large American takeout drinks are actually going to fit a little bit better inside there. No modern EV would be complete without a flat floor, and you know, we sort of find one in here. We have a storage bin, and it's maybe about 2.5 inches above the actual floor. We then have an elastic strap here to keep things from flying around. Two USB-C charge-only ports, and I like the fact that that's carpeted to help keep things from rattling around too much. Lots of soft touch materials on the entire center console happen there. Stitched materials for this armrest, and that reveals a moderately sized storage compartment. Keep in mind this does have 4-zone automatic climate control, and you will find those controls right back there on the back of that center console. So the air vents, the controls for the heated seats, and the quad zones right back there. Moving back over to the driver's side, we have a full color heads-up display there. That is a nice touch and something that we don't find in all of the EV competition. And then we have a full color LCD instrument cluster, once again attached to the steering column. It is a little bit smaller than the display we find in the XC90, but it actually appears to be very similar to the driver in terms of visual size because it's closer to the driver. It's one of the advantages of having it mounted right there. And I think this was the right thing to do. Volvo could very easily have ditched the center display and not given us one of these at all. I think this was absolutely the right direction to go in, because I do like the fact that we have not only the moving map display there, but you can also get active safety system readouts, sort of lane monitoring stuff. If we were driving along, it would actually be showing you a visual diagram of the road and what's going on. And then you can get that simplified view there. You can change through those views with this button over here on the steering wheel. And then we have the cruise control buttons and the active steering assistant button over there. New Volvo airbag cover right there. Lots of chrome going on here. Not sure what's going on with this split bottom spoke. I'm not sure about the style there. It looks a little unusual to me. And then over here we have track forward, backward, volume up, down, voice command button. And you notice these are touch sensitive buttons. So as you touch around them, you'll actually see a visual indication on the instrument cluster what's going to happen when you continue pressing that button. The cruise control controls, the rest of them are over here on the shifter stalk. So this is shifter stalk and engaging cruise control. You can see a little icon right there. Park, that's a button at the end. And then over here on this side, we have the regular turn signal stalk. So no paddles on the back of the steering wheel for regenerative braking or adjusting regen or anything like that. That's done on the screen. We do, however, have some sport grips up top, nice and sort of moderately bolstered, I would say. This is not an overly thickly rimmed steering wheel, and I like the two-tone design. Continuing around the driver's side, we have metal speaker grills for the Bowers & Wilkins system with a really intricate cut pattern on there. And then we have one of the more controversial touches in here, which is the combination window switch design. If I go in for a closer look, you can see what's happening. This switch, of course, is for the front windows and the rear windows. So you have to select between the two, and invariably I had it in the wrong mode whenever I wanted to open or close those windows. I suppose that's something that you would get used to over time, but it's not exactly my preference. And in case you're wondering, pressing and holding on the button does not do anything. In some Volkswagen products where we have just the two window switches, pressing and holding the button causes all the windows to go up or down. That's not something that Volvo has decided to program into the software. Although it's a little bit difficult to see, we do get little LEDs to tell you, we are on the rear windows or we're on the front windows.
Thank you.
All right, it's time to get the EX90 out on the road. But before we talk about the surprisingly quick 0 to 60 time, we probably ought to spend at least a little bit of time talking about the software bugs that are on this specific model. with the caveat that Volvo has promised they're still working on some of these details, and by the time you buy an EX90, a lot of them should be solved. However, I don't know how many of them will still exist, so we should definitely talk about them.
There are a few, so
there are a few, right?
Let's get to it.
The first one is related to the phone as key feature. Volvo has said that they're not fully certified with Apple for the wideband phone as key feature, but they really wanted us to try it. So they actually provided us with an iPhone paired with the vehicle, but they did not provide us with a backup key.
No, and it would have been really nice to have that backup key because our success rate has been pretty low at this point.
I think it's about 50-50.
Yeah.
Like, getting in, starting the car, moving it for this shot or that shot.
Yep.
So that was a little bit concerning, and there were certainly times where I thought, uh-oh, we are going to need to call for help.
Yeah, and the signal's not great out here, so that would be another pinch.
Also, Apple CarPlay is not available from the start. That is coming a little bit later via an over-the-air software update. That should be happening right around early 2025. They said it's not going to be this calendar year.
And this is one of those concepts that Tesla has done where they say, hey, something's coming. And this is one of those that I don't love the addition of here for Volvo, because I'd rather buy the product that's ready, because what if it never comes?
I will say that Volvo, this is not Volvo's first run at the whole, we promised CarPlay is coming, and they did deliver it in the other vehicles where they said it was a little bit delayed. So I'll give them the benefit of doubt there. This is sort of the new world, the software-defined vehicle. A lot of tech-focused, tech-fond people are certainly wanting that software-focused vehicle.
Yeah.
And, now we have one that is by Volvo here.
Which is not to say that I don't trust Volvo will do it, but it's just the question of the when. When am I going to get what I paid for? Or one of the important features for a lot of folks is going to be CarPlay. How long are they going to have to wait for CarPlay?
It does bode well, though, that we have seen features added over time to the existing system in some of Volvo's other vehicles that were already using the early Google connected infotainment systems, and the mapping has definitely gotten consistently better in Volvo's electric vehicles over time. But now we should talk about performance in this model. So this one was actually a little bit quicker than we thought.
It was. So we tested a 4.5 second 0 to 60, and I love a performance number that's a little bit on the cautious side, because it's always nice to get a little bit more than you think you're paying for.
Yeah, and there are two of us in here.
Yep.
Bear in mind, this is a preliminary number, so they will be adjusted once we can get this back at home. And we have not been able to do any 60 to 0 braking testing because we're not on our usual test surface, so it's not exactly fair. But this is a decently heavy EV. It's over 5,000 pounds, and you will certainly notice that out on the road.
Yeah, it is, and there's 3 rows, and if it's fully loaded, we still have plenty of performance to get to and from where you need to go up the hill without anyone worrying about not being able to pass that car, no matter really what your circumstances.
Yeah, the passing performance is definitely solid, and even though it is on the heavy side of things, I'd say the grip levels are pretty good. It's not like Volvo decided to give this some extraordinarily grippy tire. It's just that the center of gravity is really low, the weight balance is really well done. And this definitely has a very grown-up, very European, almost Germanic feel out on the road.
Yeah, it's a sophisticated offering, but it's not soulless, and there's a pretty fine line, I think, there.
And this is maybe where we should not talk specifically just about this. We should toss in some comparisons. So the adaptive air suspension system in the Rivian R1S definitely does not feel like anyone else's adaptive air. And this feels an awful lot to me like the one in the BMW X5, which is a very good thing.
And I will say the Rivian is pretty significantly updated for 2020, or well, I guess 2024, call it 2025 model year, but available right now is better than it was, but this is probably still going to be a step ahead.
Now, the mission of that Rivian R1S is why the suspension feels a little peculiar. The damping is not as well controlled. It's a little bit harsh over expansion joints, things like that. This has a much more normative feel to it. Versus something like a Kia EV9, this feels more luxurious, more sophisticated, because we have an air suspension, we have an adaptive suspension system on here too, and it's just going to be that next level.
And the other thing that's going to take it to a next level is going to be really the environment here in the cabin. This is a very quiet place to be, and it's going to be significantly louder in something like the Rivian or the EV9.
Yes, that's true. And Volvo did say that this is the quietest cabin that they have ever crafted. Something, to be honest, that's an area where Volvo has struggled in the past. Their cars were not always the quietest in the segment, and we certainly got, some more engine noise in the cabin in the vehicles that have an engine. But electrification has really leveled that playing field. Not only do we not get much noise in the cabin, we don't get any motor noise at all, no gearbox noise, you don't hear anything at all. And also, sorry for stabbing the accelerator pedal there, Volvo did not decide to pipe in any fake anythings in the cabin.
No, I haven't heard any Volvo exclusive soundtrack. No orchestra involved, no specific producer. It's just it's just quiet.
Just quiet.
Whatever you're listening to, that's your tones.
Yep, I really appreciate that. I would much rather have nothing than weird fake motor noise or worse, some sort of V8 soundtrack being played. Obviously, we have to talk about the Polestar 3 now.
Yeah.
One significant advantage for this and the Polestar 3 is the torque vectoring axle in the back. It's a really novel thing, and if I slow down here on this road and accelerate out, you will really notice that torque vectoring rear. Something that I really noticed when I was driving it and the Polestar 4 in Spain. Polestar 4 does not have the torque vectoring rear. It's way faster, but it doesn't have that torque vectoring rear. This and the Polestar 3 do. And the difference is more noticeable, honestly, than I thought, and than I think a lot of people will expect. You really need to drive this back to back with some other options to see the difference. This has more of a Germanic Porsche, BMW M-like feel because it can do that same sort of torque vectoring in the back. And we do not get that ability in the vast majority of EVs unless you're talking about quad or tri-motor EVs.
Right, and it's a like you said, it's a mechanical linkage here versus some of those others that are digital, reproductions of. But it makes it so you get the most out of the power available, and it's much more nimble when you get into situations like this, where raw power might be quicker 0 to 60, but this is probably going to make it more fun in the twisties than those other options.
Yeah, just sort of, it adds to the grown-up confidence, I would say. This reminds me an awful lot of a Porsche Cayenne in the way that rear axle functions, and of course those M products. A lot of folks in the comment section in other videos have asked about this, the tri-motor, the quad motor setups. Some of it depends on the power output of those motors.
Yeah.
If we're talking about, twin 200 horsepower motors in the rear, sure, that's 400 horsepower on the rear motor, but that's only 200 horsepower to one wheel.
Right.
And this will do 272 horsepower to a single rear wheel in the back. And it does that actually surprisingly frequently. Volvo does not give us a screen where they're really showing where the power is going. You just have to feel it, and you definitely notice it out on these roads.
Yeah, you keep getting pushed in and around the corners rather than having to dial back because that power just won't work in that scenario.
This may look like an electric XC90. It does not drive like an electric XC90 because it drives more like a rear-wheel drive German vehicle. That said, of course, there's still a reasonable amount of power and torque happening on the front axle. So if I slow down here, like we find in many dual motor EVs, this is not exclusive to this, you will get some, steering pull on the front because we get a lot of torque on the front, but we also get that activity on the back. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to drive the Porsche Macan yet, but, I suspect that Macan's obviously going to be sportier and more fun, right?
Right.
But I would not be overly surprised, let's put it this way, if this wasn't far off what we find in an upcoming Porsche Cayenne. So bottom line, out on the road, Volvo did exactly what they needed to do with the EX90. They've really elevated the brand and they've elevated the three-row driving experience. They obviously made it look kind of like an electric XC90, but they didn't make it drive like an electric XC90. And as well as the XC90 drives, that's actually a really good thing for this. Now let's get down to brass tacks. How much is the EX90 going to set you back? Well, including destination, the base model with almost 310 miles of range, 402 horsepower, and all-wheel drive is going to set you back $81,245. Versus some of the competition, it's important to remember that the EX90 comes with the third row standard, at least for the moment in North America. And that is the big differentiator between this and its platform mate, the Polestar 3. Polestar 3 is notably less expensive at $74,800, but it's a very different feeling vehicle. It has more of a sporty vibe, sporty mission. The interior is not as warm and inviting, and importantly, it does not have a third row in the back. The roofline's a little bit lower, and it looks a little bit more like, I guess, an electric luxury performance station wagon, whereas this looks solidly like an electric version of the XC90, exactly what Volvo was going for. Now, versus the competition, this is going to start more expensive than the Rivian R1S. That starts at $77,700, and I do think that is the toughest competition out there. The Tesla Model X, $84,930 is where that model will start if you want a third row. Remember that the Model X starts as a two-row vehicle, and the optional third row is a relatively expensive option. Also keep in mind, the only Model X that qualifies for the IRS $7,500 credit on purchases is that base two-row Model X, because there is an $80,000 cap on vehicles for that tax treatment. We don't know exactly how this or the related Polestar 3 will fare in the federal tax calculation, because again, this is going to be built in South Carolina, but we don't know where the battery components and battery materials, etc., minerals are being sourced from, and all of that does impact federal tax credit eligibility. Now, bearing in mind that the MSRP on this vehicle starts only about $5 below that tax treatment cap, I suspect there's not going to be a lot of motivation for Volvo to change and really pursue that federal tax treatment on purchases. On leases, that's anybody's guess, because of course there is the EV tax credit loophole, and of course lease deals really come down to the monthly payment and the down payment, not any of the federal tax treatment. So we just don't know what those lease rates are going to be like on the EX90 just yet. But it is right in the thick of things for this segment. So how does the EX90 stack up against the competition? Well, as always, it's going to depend on exactly what you're looking for in your next vehicle. Do you want something that is ultra tech forward, or do you want something that's maybe a blend of modern and traditional? And I would say that the EX90 falls a little bit more into that later camp than the former. Yes, we have the very tech forward Google connected infotainment system, but we also have an instrument cluster where you'd expect it to be, and a head-up display available as well. And then there's the style. It looks more like a traditional boxy three-row SUV, which certainly has a lot of benefits when it comes to cargo practicality and third-row headroom versus most of those sleek and sexy options out there. Versus the Polestar 3, a lot of it's really going to come down to, do you want a third row or don't you? Because you don't find one in the Polestar, and you do find one in here. Also, there's the different purchase experience in the Polestar envelope, but they're very similar vehicles, to be perfectly honest. The power levels are very similar. They definitely feel somewhat alike in terms of the ride quality, but the Polestar has a little bit edgier feel and a bit edgier vibe on the inside as well. It's hard to go wrong with either of those models. It's worth noting they're both built in a Volvo factory, actually. So Volvo builds that Polestar 3 for Polestar. The Model X, it's kind of an interesting twist, because the Model X starts as a two-row vehicle, it's much more egg-shaped, and it gets much more expensive than the EX90. This is going to top out right around $90,000 just over, and you can definitely get way over that in the Model X. Of course, the Model X is going to be faster, more fun arguably, and it's definitely going to be very differently styled than this. But it also is not overly fresh, because that Model X has been on sale for a while. Then of course we have the Rivian R1S. That R1S is a really tough cookie because it's wicked fast, it's an awful lot of fun, I love the way that it looks, it's even boxier than the EX90, and it could be a bit less expensive at $77,700. But it's not going to have some of those more traditional car features that we find here. It's not going to have the seat massage, it's not going to have Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, etc. Those are features you will find on this, and oddly enough, you won't find in most of the competition, including the upcoming three-row Cadillac, and I'm not talking about the Escalade IQ. There is going to be a smaller mid-size three-row called the Vistic. We don't know any details on that, but you can expect more in early 2025. I would expect its price range is going to be really quite similar to the EX90. Of course, if you wanted to spend a little bit less money, you could check out some of the other options out there, like the upcoming Volkswagen ID Buzz or the Kia EV9. Don't get me wrong, I love those options, but they're not going to feel like the Volvo in terms of the ride quality, the feature set, the fit and finish that we find in here, the luxury touches inside and outside. The Volvo really is in a different category, and that's a lot of what you're paying for. The rest of the competition from Europe, they just don't have anything like this yet. We don't have an electric Q7. We have a Mercedes EQS with a third row. That's fantastically expensive. It's not even in contention here. And we don't have a three-row BMW competitor to the EX90 just yet. So be sure and stay tuned, because hopefully those models will be coming soon and we will be driving them soon. In the meantime, let me know what you think about the EX90. Are you interested in the EX90, or would you rather delete the third row, get the Polestar 3 for a little bit less, or would you love Volvo to bring a two-row version of the EX90 to North America? Interestingly, worldwide, there's not just going to be a 5-seat model, there's going to be a relatively intriguing 4-seat EX90 as well, although I don't have any details on that. See all of you later.